Hi everyone, it's me Arden Lee, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the question of how do we learn to trust our intuition when we have PTSD? This is a question that was asked by one of the members of the Repatterning Parlor, which is the group I moderate on Facebook. So if you're not yet a member, by the way, go ahead and check out the link that is in the description box. Come say hi. But it's a question that I've also seen pop up in a number of different places lately. And it's a really good inquiry because essentially what happens if we have trauma in our backgrounds and we are suffering from post-traumatic stress symptoms, it's hard for us to learn how to trust our gut feelings and our emotions and the signals that our bodies are giving us because of the trauma responses that can come up even when there's not a threat of danger in front of us, right? So essentially, let's talk about a couple of different trauma polarities. One is desensitization and one is hyperarousal. There's a lot that can happen when you have trauma, but these two responses in particular tend to be the polarities that people orient around, or you can be a hybrid, or you can be anything in between, or at times, you can have a little of both. Desensitization is what happens when our bodies shut off in response to trauma. If our bodies have been sustaining too much harm, too much distress signals, it'll get to a point where our bodies are like, okay, well, you're not listening to me, so I'm just going to shut off entirely so that you and I can both survive. This is where we get those symptoms of numbness, feeling like we don't feel anything, and hedonia, feeling like not only have we lost the ability to detect when we're in danger, but we've also lost the ability to feel joy, right? The other polarity of this is hyperarousal. Hyperarousal is a state where you feel that the trauma is ongoing all the time, right? So essentially, when you're in a hyper-aroused state, it can be really easy to be triggered, right? We can see this, for example, with the classic example of war veterans who hear fireworks and then they feel like they're immediately thrust back into their traumatic experience where they were in the trenches hearing gunshots, right? So, and even if no matter where you align yourself along the spectrum between these polarities at any given time, it is always possible also to experience a post-traumatic stress trigger, right? We can be triggered by something that reminds us of the incident, and it could even be something that looks totally innocent in nature, where there is no harm, no danger that's actually present, but if it reminds us of those circumstances, then in our minds, as our brains are experiencing those same thoughts and those same emotions and telling our bodies to create the sort of stress hormones that put us into that, fight or flight or freeze or fawn response state, as our bodies are releasing stress hormones as a way to cope with the perceived threat, whether that threat is real or not. Our bodies don't know the difference. Our bodies feel like if it's happening in our internal environment, it may as well be happening externally, right? The amount of stress that our bodies undergo in terms of our thoughts, our emotions, the stress hormones that get released, the fight or flight or freeze or fawn responses that happen, they're basically no different from what would be happening if we perceived a threat that was real, right? What happens in our bodies happens based on our perception of a threat, not whether that threat is real or not. So what this means is, how do you learn to trust your gut when you're suffering from PTSD? Because your body is going to not be a very reliable narrator, right? You might see something that reminds you of a trauma you've suffered in the past, and that might trigger a response in you that is based on that past trauma and not based on the present reality. And that's normal, and that's the biology that we're born with, and that's certainly not to minimize anyone's experience of that perceived threat. But that is the biology of how triggers happen. On the other hand, you could be suffering desensitization. This is something that I suffered for a really long time. And I wasn't able to see red flags because I'd become so used to living in red flags that it was just normal. I couldn't tell when I was being hurt until it was pretty far into the situation. And this applied both emotionally and physically. when I was living in New York in sort of the worst of the worst of my trauma response years, I actually suffered an injury where I broke the fourth metacarpal of my right hand in a parkour class. I was doing a 180 tack off a column, and I swung my arm out as I was tacking off of it, and my knuckle hit this like very this very solid metal pole, and my metacarpal fractured. And I knew that it had happened because I was feeling like dizzy and nauseous. I saw some spots. But in terms of the pain in my hand, I really couldn't feel it. I knew something was wrong, but I knew something was wrong because I was pressing on my knuckle going, and none of the other ones were doing that. So I knew something was wrong. I went to the doctor, and they were like, "Yeah, you're not feeling any pain when I touch here." And I was like, "Nope." And they were like, "Wow, you have a remarkably high pain tolerance." The same was true for me of emotional situations. I would get into a situation thinking like, "Oh, this looks great on paper," or whatever. But then, I would keep going at it and keep thinking like, "No, this must be working somehow," and all the while ignoring the fact that it really it didn't feel good to me, that I wasn't being treated well. I kept thinking, well, if I do something differently, I can change this situation or whatever, because I'd been in environments where I'd been treated so badly that I really just didn't know the difference. So this is a great question to ask. How do we learn to trust our bodies? So here's what I'm going to say is, first of all, this is not a perfect process. If you're asking, how do I learn to trust my intuition right now in the moment when I'm not sure whether I'm having a stress response to a trigger or to a threat that's real, that's tough to do without an outside opinion. So that's something I am going to say, by the way, is surround yourself with people who can support you, who can let you know, like, oh yeah, that does seem messed up, or who can let you know, or like, no, I think this is what this person meant, or whatever. One of the ways that I have really gotten a lot of support and gotten through, getting comfortable in my own discernment is by keeping people around me who I trust to have my back and who I trust to share my values. And that's been having that support, and also having, choosing those people because of that alignment of values has also helped me to reinforce those values for myself, and also be able to use those values to further discern better in the future, right? Because we become the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with, because one of the ways of assimilating a new belief, if we want to have a new belief that we want to adopt for ourselves, is to join a social circle or create that social circle and make sure there are peers around us who share those beliefs. So absolutely, learning to trust my intuition is something that I would not have been able to do nearly as well as I can at this point if I had not chosen supportive friends around me who shared the same values, essentially. So that way I could go to them and I could say something like, hey, is this messed up? Like, this seems messed up to me. But as a survivor of gaslighting, I'm not sure if I'm just overreacting or if I'm misreading the situation. Tell me, like, what is your take on this? And that's tough because we can't always do that in the moment. We can't always do that when we're having a stress response. But if we do that over time, we're going to learn to trust ourselves a lot better. And that brings me back to this point about the fact that this is an ongoing process. And learning to trust your body again is an ongoing dialogue. It's an ongoing conversation. My body, I used to compare my body to a cat like a traumatized cat that you would adopt and bring home, who would only, who would hide under the couch and then would only like sneak out to the food dish after it got dark and everyone went to sleep, who didn't want to come out unless there was a really good reason to. And over time, my body has gotten more comfortable, and that's precisely because I've put effort into creating environments of felt safety. What do I mean by felt safety? Felt safety is what I mean when I talk about that perception of whether something is a threat or whether it's safe, right? And of course, actual safety is important to this, right? But when I say felt safety, I really mean, where are the places the environments and the social circles that I can go where my body really feels safe. Not just this is safe, but it feels safe and it also feels worth it to relax and open up a bit. And in communicating with my body and saying like, okay, it's important, I think, in this sense also to set an intention. And when we've been in a lot of traumatic situations and when we're on that journey of starting to repattern and starting to look at some of the choices that we've made in the past or situations that we've allowed, without blaming ourselves for what happened, what I've found is that there is a real strong power in making an acknowledgement and just saying to my body, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you before. I'm sorry that that I chose to put us in situations where our needs and our boundaries were not honored, and that I made those choices out of survival, or I allowed them out of survival, or even, hey, there was no control that I had over them, and I'm sorry, and I understand why you don't want to talk to me anymore, right? I got to a point where I realized that my body had given up on talking to me because I had stopped listening to it. And in order to open up that dialogue again, I had to set an intention and say to my body, I'm sorry, I'm ready to listen, and I'm ready to make changes. And like I said, my body was that cat hiding under the couch for a long time. But over time, trust in any relationship is established through time and consistency. So this ongoing conversation of showing up for our bodies and listening to our bodies and discerning and allowing ourselves to make mistakes and allowing ourselves to say, okay, you know what, that didn't feel good. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. Let's not do that again. And conversely, oh, hey, maybe I misread this situation and I got triggered and I actually lashed out and got angry at someone who didn't deserve it. And we can own our accountability in that, but I also want to give us permission. You guys, trauma healing is messy. And we will get triggered sometimes. And we will make mistakes in judgment. And we will perceive threats when threats aren't actually there. Or we will perceive minor threats as being major threats. And we will need the support of our friends and sometimes our community to help us get through those times. And I want to give us just a little more permission and relaxation around that, because expecting perfection of ourselves when we're in a trauma healing process is very, very difficult. If anyone could have done it, it would have been me, and I definitely wasn't perfect. So with all of my perfectionism of my former, pre-trauma healing life, the way that I used perfectionism as a coping mechanism, I was pretty good at it. So if I couldn't get through a trauma healing with my perfectionist ideals, I wouldn't expect anybody to. The thing is, when you make mistakes, it doesn't mean like you're just gonna lash out willy-nilly, obviously. What it does mean is that when you make mistakes in your judgment, that you forgive yourself, you contextualize what happened, and you can certainly make amends where need be, or you can make new discernments where need be. But you want to keep coming back and forgiving yourself, and you want to keep coming back to your dialogue with your body. You just want to keep coming back. You want to do your best to establish safety around you, right? Creating one of the things that was really key to my healing naturally was moving out of New York, right? I think it's kind of funny how, for me, it was like a whole coast. my trauma felt so big, I had to leave a whole coast behind. But whatever it is, whether it's, you don't have to move across the country necessarily, but can you get into an environment that will allow you to feel safe and open up and relax? That is really, really key, because if the threats are ongoing, then of course your body is still going to be responding to them. Can you get to another place where you can breathe and where you can start to establish that sense of felt safety, and where you can tell your body, like, okay, it's safe for us to start feeling again, and I'm going to listen to you this time, and what needs to happen, over time, the ways that we listen and discern with our bodies and the ways that we keep that dialogue going. But this is a process, you guys. So I don't have a silver bullet answer for how in the moment right now do you tell if, you know, your intuition is on point or if you're experiencing a trigger, right? Or if you're desensitized and you're not experiencing a red flag where you should see one, right? That one I have to really say, rely on people that you trust and people who share your values. And remember that, remember too that I want to throw this in here because it's super important. There may be people around you who really care about you, but if you're trauma bonding with them and you're suffering from the same situations and you're not both working toward that growth, then sometimes the people who care about you can still enable you. I had moments come up for me where once I realized I had codependent tendencies, I realized that a lot of my codependent friends, as much as I loved them and as much as they loved me and as much as we supported each other in, you know, dating these emotionally unavailable people, they were enabling me in many senses. So you really want to make sure that the people who you're surrounding yourself with and whose guidance you're taking on in instances like these are people who not only share your values, but who have lives for themselves that you would want to replicate, right? If I go to someone for dating advice, let's say I'm like my former, you know, still entrenched in codependency self, and I go to one of my codependent friends, you know, of course they're going to give me advice to like text the guy, fawn, you know, be super cute, you know, like, because that's what they're doing too, right? I want to look to the advice of people whose lives I want to emulate. And when I decided for myself that I wanted to have stronger boundaries and I wanted to create healthy relationships, I started hanging out with people who were in healthy relationships so I could observe that process, right? So I could absorb all of that energy and start to have those standards for myself. So I just want to add that in there, that's really important when you're looking to get that second opinion. Make sure that it is someone whose opinion you really trust, and usually that's going to be based on the results that you're seeing in their life. You know, would you want to be in their circumstances that they're creating for themselves? Because they're going to give you the formula that they use for themselves, and you want to make sure that that's a formula that's going to work for you. So yeah, this is an ongoing conversation. It's not a perfect process, and it's okay to mess up. It's okay also to tell people around you that you are in a trauma healing process, and things might be messy, and that that's not an excuse. You want to be accountable for your behavior, but you might also, you know, if someone is really a friend to you, you might need a little patience, and you might need them to communicate with you even more directly than they were doing with you before. This is something that was key in a lot of my friendships as I was going through too. You know, as I was going through my messy phase, like, I'm not sure how to discern anything. Anyone who, you know, says something nasty to me on Facebook is immediately like, you know, a PTSD trigger, because, you know, I had my life threatened online basically like 10 years ago. So, right. So that would come up for me at you know, at some pretty small things. And yeah, it was messy, but I ended up telling people like, hey, as I'm going through this process and there's this messy, awkward growth that's happening, you know, I'm really doing my best to stay in alignment with my integrity and be my best self. But if you have needs, or if there's anything that I'm doing that, you know, is awkward or uncomfortable for you, I need you to express that to me directly, and I need you to communicate with me very clearly, because right now my focus is just on my healing and it's on myself. And that necessarily means that I can't have, you know, my scrolling green numbers matrix of making sure that everyone's needs in the room are being met, because I'm focusing that energy back here. So if there is something you need from me, just communicate it to me and just be clear with me, and, you know, we can take it from there. Yeah, I think that about covers it. I know that was kind of long, but it's a good question. It's a good deep dive. And one last thing that I'll end on here is just that even though I have not always been 100% correct in my perception, in terms of my intuition, in terms of listening to my body, I do believe that there has always been an inner signal, like a beacon that has been guiding me along this path. How do I explain this without sounding too woo? Or maybe I'll just sound woo and just go for it. Whatever it is, I do believe that there is a mechanism in our body, or maybe even in our spirit, that guides us toward the light, even when we're in the dark. I didn't understand all the trauma that I had when I was living in New York. I knew I was depressed. I thought that I was suffering from mental illness, and I guess I was, depending on how you define it, but I thought it was an internal problem with me. I thought I was just messed up and broken, and I didn't know what to do, and I was stuck. But something about Los Angeles was calling me, and I said, you know what, I'm going to move out there. I'm going to start my life over because there's nothing here for me. And it was when I got to LA and I got to experience that sense of felt safety of being out of those environments and getting to make that fresh start, that it finally was safe for me to relax and open up. And when I opened up, all my trauma kind of like fell out of the closet like boxes that I, shoved behind the door. And I don't know what it was in me that just said, just go to LA, resensitize. You're not feeling things, and that's bad. That's harmful to you. You didn't feel it when you broke your hand. Get out of here and just be somewhere where you can relax, and maybe you can start treating your ability to feel things, the way that you treat your hearing loss. I was having hearing loss at the time, which I think it's actually gotten a lot better as I've resensitized to. Probably that's for another video, but I do believe that along this path, there has been some sort of internal compass that has been guiding me. And even if we don't see that right away, when I look back now, and I look back to, about 5 years ago when I left, about 6 years ago, maybe, when I made the, decision, somewhere around 5 or 6 years, whatever, when I left, I couldn't know where I'd be today. I didn't think I was going to create the repatterning project. I didn't think I had a whole ton of trauma that needed healing because I was desensitized, because I was suppressing everything. I didn't understand that. But I took it one step at a time. And I just encourage you guys to follow that internal guidance and to trust that even if you don't see everything working out in the moment, and even if you can't discern in this moment today whether you're actually triggered or whether something is, whether something is a threat or not, do trust that internal compass and trust that to guide you. And you'll get to the place where you'll feel safer to start feeling things. And that's how you'll start to develop that relationship and that dialogue with your body so that you can start to trust its signals. So thank you guys for listening. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.